The CEO, who's been single for 25 years, falls in love at first sight with his company's new cleaner. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. How are you? Keep your face always toward the sunshine, and shadows will fall behind you. I have a quick question for you. Do you remember when Joe joined our channel? Yes, I mean your very own channel, Mr. Peter Stories. Also, did you enjoy the last story? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to share them in the comments below. All right, without further ado, let's dive into today's story. Sit back, relax, and let your imagination soar. The first rays of dawn painted Seattle's skyline in hues of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors of Anders Industries headquarters. Amel Anders stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his tall frame silhouetted against the awakening city below. At 48, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had rebuilt his empire from the ashes of betrayal. His reflection in the glass showed a man whom time had shaped rather than worn down. Steel-grey eyes, sharp and observant, were framed by slight creases that spoke of years spent in boardrooms and late-night strategy sessions. His dark hair, now threaded with distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, was immaculately styled. The custom-made Tom Ford suit he wore, a deep charcoal that emphasized his broad shoulders, hadn't a single crease despite the early hour. Amel adjusted his titanium Cartier watch, a reminder of his first successful merger after the divorce, and checked the time, 5:30 a.m. These early morning hours were his sanctuary, a time when the bustling headquarters of his technology empire stood silent and empty. Here he could drop the mask of the ruthless CEO and simply be Amel, the boy from Brooklyn who had dared to dream big. 25 years. The thought whispered through his mind as he turned away from the window. 25 years since Valencia had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. He'd been young then, just 23, and drunk on his first taste of success. She'd swept into his life like a summer storm, all bright smiles and promises of forever. By the time he'd discovered her true nature, her carefully orchestrated plan to take control of his company and leave him with nothing, it had almost been too late. The memory still burned, but the pain had dulled to a familiar ache. He'd learned his lesson well. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not in his position. Love was a weakness that could bring even the strongest man to his knees. Amel's Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble as he began his morning ritual, a solitary walk through each floor of his building. It was a habit he'd developed in those first desperate years after the divorce, when paranoia had driven him to check every detail personally. Now, it was simply his way of connecting with the empire he'd built, of reminding himself what he'd sacrificed everything for. The security panel next to the executive elevator verified his thumbprint with a soft chime. As he descended, he reviewed his schedule for the day. Board meeting at 9, lunch with potential investors, quarterly reviews in the afternoon. The same careful dance of power and influence he'd perfected over the years. The elevator doors opened to the reception area on the ground floor, and Amel stepped out, expecting the familiar emptiness. Instead, the sound of gentle humming stopped him in his tracks. The melody was soft, almost ethereal in the morning quiet. It floated through the air like a forgotten dream, wrapping around him with an inexplicable warmth. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this unexpected moment of peace. Following the sound, he rounded the corner and felt the world shift beneath his feet. There, bathed in the golden light of dawn, stood a vision that made his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. A young woman in a modest navy uniform was tending to the prize orchids that graced the reception area. Her movements were graceful, almost dance-like, as she carefully examined each bloom. The rising sun caught the rich undertones of her dark skin, creating an aura that seemed to glow from within. Her hair was styled in neat professional braids that caught the light as she moved, revealing subtle hints of auburn. She handled each flower with such gentleness, such care, that Amel found himself holding his breath, unwilling to disturb this moment of pure serenity. As if sensing his presence, she turned, and Amel felt something crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. Her eyes, warm and intelligent, met his with neither the intimidation he was accustomed to, nor the calculating interest he'd learned to distrust. Instead, they held a quiet confidence, a sense of self-assurance that came from within rather than from status or position. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the same melodic quality as her humming. A smile graced her features, genuine and unrehearsed, and Amel felt his pulse quicken in a way it hadn't for 25 years. "I'm Precious Zuri, your new facilities maintenance coordinator." The job title didn't fit the sophistication with which she carried herself, yet she spoke it with pride, no hint of apology or shame. She stood straight, professional but relaxed, clearly comfortable in her own skin, in a way that spoke of inner strength rather than arrogance. Amel realized he was staring and hadn't responded. He, who could command a boardroom with a single glance, who could negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself struggling to form words. The usual walls he maintained between himself and others seemed to waver, like smoke in a breeze. "Welcome to Anders Industries, Miss Zuri," he finally managed, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm Amel Anders." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Of course, his portrait hung in the lobby, but she didn't change her demeanor. No sudden shift to sycophantic pleasantries, no calculated adjustment of her smile. She simply nodded, professional and genuine. "The orchids are beautiful," she said, gesturing to the flowers. "Though this one," she pointed to a bloom he'd never paid particular attention to, "seems a bit undernourished. I've adjusted its position to get better morning light. Sometimes the smallest changes can make the biggest difference." There was something in the way she said it, a deeper wisdom beneath the simple observation about flowers that resonated with him. Here was someone who understood the value of patience, of nurturing growth rather than demanding it. A distant door opened somewhere in the building, breaking the spell of the moment. The workday was beginning, reality intruding on this strange bubble of time where nothing existed except the golden light of dawn and the woman who had appeared like a dream within it. "I should continue my rounds," Precious said, gathering her tools with efficient grace. "Have a good day, Mr. Anders." She moved past him, her presence leaving a lingering warmth in the air. The subtle scent of jasmine. Her perfume, he realized, mixed with the fragrance of the orchids she'd been tending. Amel stood there, watching her disappear down the hallway, aware that something fundamental had shifted in his world. For the first time in 25 years, the walls he'd built around his heart didn't feel like protection. They felt like a prison. And somewhere deep inside, in a place he'd thought long dead, a familiar feeling stirred. Hope. The morning sun continued its ascent, painting the orchids in shades of gold and promise. Amel Anders, the man who had sworn never to trust his heart again, found himself looking forward to tomorrow's dawn with an anticipation he'd forgotten he could feel. The day ahead still held its meetings and decisions, its power plays and negotiations. But now, threading through it all like a streak of light through clouds, was the memory of a smile and the sound of humming in an empty hall. 25 years of winter had ended in a single unexpected dawn, and Amel Anders didn't even know it yet. Chapter 2. Whispers and Window Panes. The executive floor of Anders Industries hummed with an energy that hadn't been present in years. Like ripples in a still pond, whispers spread through the sleek corridors, carried on the breath of curiosity and speculation. At the center of it all was the unusual behavior of their normally unflappable CEO. Thaddeus Kingston leaned back in his leather chair, his dark eyes twinkling with amusement as he watched his oldest friend through the glass walls of their adjoining offices. Amel Anders, the man known for his laser focus and intimidating attention to detail, had just walked past the West Wing hallway for the third time in an hour. It was the same hallway where, not coincidentally, a certain facilities maintenance coordinator was reviewing the building's sustainable cleaning protocols with her team. At 6'4", with broad shoulders and skin the color of burnished mahogany, Thaddeus cut an impressive figure in his own right. He'd been by Amel's side since their days at Yale, through the meteoric rise, the devastating fall, and the painful rebuilding. In 25 years, he'd never seen his friend so obviously distracted. "You know," Thaddeus called out, as Amel passed his office again, "I'm pretty sure the maintenance team has that area under control." His deep voice carried a note of gentle teasing that only a friend of 3 decades could get away with. Amel paused, caught in his transparent surveillance. A slight flush colored his neck, something Thaddeus hadn't seen since their college days, when Amel had tried to pretend he wasn't nursing a hangover during their business ethics final. "I'm merely ensuring our new protocols are being implemented correctly," Amel replied, his usual commanding tone somewhat undermined by the way his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Thaddeus rose from his desk, straightening his custom-made suit, a necessity when you stood at his height, and joined his friend at the doorway. "Of course you are," he said, voice dripping with knowing sarcasm. "And I suppose these intensive inspections have nothing to do with Miss Zuri?" The slight stiffening of Amel's shoulders told Thaddeus everything he needed to know. In the 3 weeks since Precious had joined the company, subtle changes had begun to appear in his friend's behavior. The man who never took coffee breaks now found reasons to visit the staff lounge. The executive who had automated most of his communications now insisted on delivering certain facilities-related memos in person. Meanwhile, several floors below, another conversation was taking place in the sleek confines of the Human Resources Department. Imara Blackwood, the company's sharp-tongued HR director, observed Precious Zuri with keen interest over the rim of her ergonomic desk. "You've made quite an impression in your first few weeks," Imara noted, her refined British accent adding weight to her words. She was a striking woman in her early 50s, with elegant locks streaked with silver and eyes that missed nothing, especially on our illustrious CEO. Precious looked up from the sustainability report she was reviewing, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Anders has been very supportive of the Facilities Department's initiatives," she said diplomatically, though a slight tension in her shoulders betrayed her awareness of the situation. Imara's perfectly arched eyebrow rose slightly. In her 15 years at Anders Industries, she'd seen countless women try to catch Amel Anders' eye. Socialites, executives, even a minor European royal, all had failed to penetrate the walls he'd built after the Valencia disaster. Yet here was this remarkable young woman, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, simply doing her job with grace and intelligence, and she had managed to crack his carefully maintained facade without even trying. "The big boss has been watching you," Imara mentioned casually, pouring them both cups of her preferred Earl Grey tea. "And not in the usual way, he scrutinizes new employees." A flash of something, uncertainty perhaps, crossed Precious's face before she composed herself. "I'm sure Mr. Anders is simply thorough in his oversight of all departments," she replied, though her fingers tightened slightly around the delicate teacup. Imara noted the reaction with interest. Most women would have preened at the suggestion of Amel Anders's attention. Precious seemed almost wary of it. The truth was, Precious had her guard up for good reason. Life had taught her harsh lessons about fairy tales and their inevitable disappointments. At 28, she'd already weathered storms that would have broken others. The dream of becoming a nurse, nurtured since childhood, had slipped through her fingers when her mother's illness had drained their modest savings, 3 years of nursing school, countless nights of study, all sacrificed to medical bills and the reality of survival. But Precious had done what she'd always done: adapted, survived, found new ways to move forward. The facilities coordinator position at Anders Industries had been a blessing, offering better pay and benefits than she dared hope for. She wouldn't risk it, couldn't risk it, by reading too much into her employer's apparent interest. Back on the executive floor, Amel found himself standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, lost in thought. The Seattle skyline stretched before him, a familiar view that now seemed somehow different, as if the city itself had shifted slightly on its axis. "You haven't been this distracted since that disastrous attempt to ask Jennifer Collins to the spring formal," Thaddeus remarked, joining his friend at the window. "You remember when you knocked over the entire punch bowl and ruined her dress?" Amel shot him a warning look, but there was no real heat behind it. "We agreed never to mention that incident again." "We agreed a lot of things in college," Thaddeus countered, his expression growing serious, "including that you wouldn't let one person's betrayal define the rest of your life." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 25 years of unspoken concerns. Amel's jaw tightened, the familiar walls starting to rise, but Thaddeus pressed on. "She's not Valencia," he said quietly. "Anyone with eyes can see that." Before Amel could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Cordelia Winters, his executive assistant, entered with her usual efficient grace. "Mr. Anders, the quarterly reports are ready for your review and—" She hesitated, something unusual for the normally unflappable woman. "There's been a small situation in the West Wing maintenance area." Amel's attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of situation?" "Nothing serious," Cordelia assured him quickly, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Just some disagreement between Miss Zuri and Xavier Blackwood about the implementation of the new cleaning protocols. Mr. Blackwood was quite vocal about his opinions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Xavier Blackwood, Imara's ambitious nephew and a junior executive in operations, had been making his displeasure about the new maintenance policies known for weeks. The fact that they had been proposed by someone he considered beneath his station had clearly rankled him. "Where is Miss Zuri now?" Amel's voice was carefully controlled, but Thaddeus recognized the dangerous undertone. "In the staff break room with Imara," Cordelia replied. "She handled the situation with remarkable composure, actually, but Mr. Blackwood's comments were rather inappropriate." Amel was moving before she finished speaking, his long strides eating up the distance to the elevator. Thaddeus watched him go, a mixture of concern and hope warring in his expression. "Well," he murmured to himself, "this should be interesting." In the break room, Precious sat with perfect posture, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Imara's presence beside her was both protective and evaluating, watching how the younger woman handled the aftermath of confrontation. "Your uncle," Precious said finally, her voice steady, "has some very strong opinions about the appropriate roles of maintenance staff." Imara's expression darkened. "My nephew has many opinions, most of them entirely worthless. He's forgotten that his own grandmother was a housekeeper who put his father through college, something I'll be reminding him of very shortly." The door opened, and both women looked up to find Amel Anders filling the frame, his expression thunderous. The sight of him, normally so controlled, now barely containing his anger on her behalf, made something flutter in Precious's chest. She squashed the feeling immediately. She couldn't afford to read too much into his concern. He would likely show the same for any employee facing harassment, but as their eyes met across the room, something passed between them, an unspoken current of understanding and connection that defied their respective positions and all the walls they'd built around their hearts. The whispers would grow louder after that day, spreading through the building like wildfire. The way the CEO had dressed down Xavier Blackwood in front of the entire executive floor. How he'd implemented new anti-harassment policies with unprecedented speed. The subtle but unmistakable protective stance he took whenever he was in the same room as the facility's coordinator. And through it all, Precious continued her work with quiet dignity, neither encouraging nor discouraging the attention, while Amel found more and more reasons to walk past the West Wing, their orbits drawing ever closer, despite all the reasons they should remain apart. The window panes of Anders Industries reflected it all. The glances, the whispers, the careful dance of two hearts beginning to remember how to trust. And in his office high above Seattle, Thaddeus Kingston smiled, watching his friend slowly come back to life after 25 years of winter. Chapter 3. The Garden Project. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Anders Industries' main conference room, catching the delicate prisms of the crystal water glasses and casting rainbow patterns across the polished mahogany table. Amel Anders stood at the head of the room, his commanding presence softened by an energy that none of his executives had seen before. Spread across the table were detailed architectural renderings, not of sleek technology centers or corporate expansions, but of something far more revolutionary for a tech company. A rooftop ecosystem that would transform the stark urban space into a living laboratory of sustainability and healing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built his empire, "Anders Industries has always been at the forefront of technological innovation. Today, we expand that innovation into environmental sustainability and community health." Behind him, the massive screen displayed images that made several board members lean forward in surprise. The current rooftop, a utilitarian expanse of concrete and HVAC units, had been reimagined as a cascading garden of healing herbs, vegetables, and flowers. Solar panels were artfully integrated with vertical growing systems. Rainwater collection fed into a sophisticated irrigation network that would sustain the garden while reducing the building's water consumption. In the corner, Precious sat quietly, her heart racing as she watched the revelation of plans she'd helped develop. Her expertise in urban agriculture and sustainable practices had shaped every detail, from the selection of drought-resistant medicinal herbs to the innovative composting system that would handle the building's organic waste. Thaddeus Kingston, watching from his usual seat at Amel's right hand, noticed how his friend's eyes kept finding Precious during the presentation. After 25 years of friendship, he could read the subtle signs of transformation in Amel, the softening around his eyes, the hint of passion in his voice that had nothing to do with profit margins. "The Anders Industries Sustainable Initiative," Amel continued, clicking through meticulously prepared slides, "will serve multiple purposes. First, it will significantly reduce our environmental impact through green technology integration. Images showed solar arrays, cleverly disguised within pergolas dripping with flowering vines, while rainwater collection systems were concealed beneath beds of native plants. Every technical innovation was balanced with natural beauty, creating a space that was both functional and inspiring. Second," he continued, moving to the next phase, "it will provide fresh, organic produce for our cafeteria and local food banks, demonstrating corporate responsibility in action. The plans revealed raised beds designed for maximum yield, vertical growing systems that would produce everything from tomatoes to leafy greens, and a greenhouse that would extend the growing season through Seattle's winters. But most importantly," here his voice softened slightly as his gaze found Precious again, "it will serve as a living laboratory for sustainable practices and community education. We're not just building a garden, we're creating a model for urban environmental responsibility that can be replicated across the city." Xavier Blackwood's voice cut through the impressed murmurs, sharp with barely concealed disdain. "And who exactly will be managing this elaborate project? Surely not the maintenance department." The weight of old money and privilege lay heavy in his tone, making several board members shift uncomfortably. But before Amel could respond, Precious rose gracefully from her seat. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and confident, "I'd be happy to address that question, Mr. Blackwood." She moved to the front of the room with natural poise, her professional attire perfectly tailored but far from flashy. Standing beside the architectural renderings, she began to explain the technical aspects of the project with a depth of knowledge that quickly commanded attention. The vertical growing systems will utilize hydroponics and aquaponics, she explained, bringing up detailed schematics. This allows us to maximize food production while minimizing water usage. We've designed a closed-loop system where fish waste fertilizes the plants, while the plants clean the water for the fish. Her fingers traced the flow patterns on the screen, her passion evident in every word. But the technical innovations are just the beginning. Each element of the garden has been chosen not just for sustainability, but for healing properties and educational value. She clicked to a new slide showing the medicinal herb section. "Here, we'll grow everything from echinacea and chamomile to lavender and lemon balm. These plants have been used in traditional medicine for generations, and now they're being studied by modern science for their therapeutic properties." The board members, initially skeptical, found themselves drawn in by her expertise and genuine enthusiasm. Even Xavier's supporters couldn't deny the depth of thought that had gone into the project. "The garden will also serve as a teaching space," she continued, showing areas designed for small groups. "We'll partner with local schools for environmental education, host workshops on sustainable gardening, and provide hands-on experience for community members interested in urban agriculture." As she spoke about the community impact, her whole face lit up with inner conviction. Amel, standing nearby, felt his heart swell with admiration. This was what had first drawn him to her. Not just her beauty or intelligence, but her ability to see beyond surface value to the deeper potential in everything. "Ms. Zuri," he said during a natural pause in her presentation, "would you lead this project?" The room fell silent. It was more than a project management role. It was an unprecedented opportunity that would place her directly in the corporate hierarchy. Several board members exchanged meaningful glances, while Xavier's face darkened with barely suppressed outrage. Precious met Amel's eyes, seeing in them not just professional respect, but something deeper, something that made her heart race. "I would be honored," she said quietly, "but I would need to maintain oversight of my regular duties as well. The maintenance team will report directly to you," Amel finished smoothly. "Consider this a promotion, Ms. Zuri. Director of Facilities and Sustainability, effective immediately." The title hung in the air like the scent of blooming flowers, full of promise and possibility. Precious felt the weight of the moment, understood all the implications of what was being offered. It was an opportunity beyond anything she'd imagined, but also a challenge that would test everything she knew about growth and adaptation. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Amel replied softly, and for a moment everyone in the room faded away as their eyes held a conversation only they could understand. The meeting continued with discussion of budgets and timelines, but the energy had shifted. Even the most conservative board members found themselves caught up in the vision of transformation, not just of their rooftop, but of what their company could become. Later that evening, as the sun began to set over Seattle's skyline, Precious stood alone on the rooftop. The space was still bare concrete and utility units, but in her mind's eye, she could see it transformed. Beds of healing herbs releasing their fragrance into the air, vertical gardens climbing toward the sky, quiet spaces where people could reconnect with nature high above the city streets. The door opened behind her, and she knew without turning who it would be. Amel's presence had become something she could feel, like the approach of spring after a long winter. "The view is different from up here," he said, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Everything looks different from a new perspective," she replied softly, thinking of how much her life had changed since that first morning among the orchids. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The space between them hummed with unspoken words and careful distance, like the pause between planting a seed and seeing the first green shoot break through soil. "Why did you really start this project, Mr. Anders?" Precious finally asked, turning to face him. Her direct gaze pierced through his carefully maintained facade, demanding truth. The moment stretched between them, fragile as a new leaf. Amel looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the professional exterior to the strength and vulnerability beneath. For the first time in 25 years, he felt the urge to let someone see past his walls. But before he could answer, the door opened again, bringing Cordelia with a stack of contracts requiring his immediate attention. The moment shattered like morning frost in sunlight, leaving both of them with the lingering awareness that something had shifted, something had begun. As Precious descended in the elevator alone, she pressed her hand against her racing heart. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself. "Fairy tales don't happen to girls like you." But up on the rooftop, standing where she had stood, Amel Anders watched the last light fade from the sky and allowed himself to hope, just a little, that maybe some gardens were worth the risk of growing. Chapter 4. Hidden Wounds. Seattle's infamous rain drummed against the windows of Anders Industries, turning the city into a watercolor painting of grays and silvers. 2 weeks had passed since the announcement of the rooftop garden project, and the building buzzed with a different kind of energy. The executive floor, once a fortress of silence and efficiency, now regularly echoed with the sound of construction crews heading up to the roof. Amel Anders stood in his office, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. His reflection showed a man caught between past and present, between the careful walls he'd built and the inexplicable urge to tear them down. The stack of papers on his desk included the latest progress report from the garden project, bearing Precious Zuri's neat signature at the bottom. He'd read it 7 times already, not for the content, which was as thorough and professional as everything she did, but for the small personal notes she'd added in the margins. Observations about which plants were thriving in the test beds, ideas for expanding the meditation area, even a small sketch of a hummingbird she'd spotted during her morning inspection. These glimpses into her mind, her way of seeing beauty in the smallest details, affected him in ways he couldn't explain, or rather, in ways he refused to explain, because explaining meant acknowledging feelings he'd sworn never to entertain again. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Thaddeus entered, carrying 2 cups of the absurdly expensive coffee they both pretended not to be addicted to. "You're brooding again," his friend observed, settling into one of the leather chairs. "I recognize that particular shade of existential crisis on your face." Amel accepted the coffee, but ignored the comment, turning back to the rain-streaked window. "The quarterly numbers are strong. The board is pleased with the sustainable initiative's PR impact. Everything is proceeding according to plan." "Everything except you," Thaddeus replied quietly. "I saw you yesterday, you know, when she was teaching those kids from the youth center about urban farming. You looked like a man who'd been struck by lightning but couldn't decide whether to run from the storm or chase it." The memory flashed unbidden in Amel's mind. Precious, surrounded by teenagers from Seattle's roughest neighborhoods, explaining how to test soil pH with the same patience and dignity she brought to board meetings. The way her face had lit up when one particularly sullen boy had successfully transplanted his first seedling. The sound of her laugh, real and unguarded, when another kid had accidentally sprayed her with the watering can. "It's not that simple," Amel said finally, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Because of Valencia?" Thaddeus asked, though they both knew it wasn't really a question. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with 25 years of unspoken pain. Valencia Pierce, the woman who had nearly destroyed everything Amel had built. She'd been brilliant, beautiful, and utterly ruthless in her ambition. By the time he'd discovered her true nature, the careful manipulation, the secret deals with his competitors, the planned corporate takeover that would have left him with nothing, it had almost been too late. "You know what she did," Amel said, his grip tightening on the coffee cup. "I know what she did," Thaddeus agreed, "but I also know what you've done to yourself since then. 25 years of holding everyone at arm's length. 25 years of turning yourself into some kind of corporate machine. When was the last time you actually lived, Amel?" Before he could respond, Cordelia appeared at the door. "Mr. Anders, there's a situation with the garden project that requires your immediate attention." Amel was moving before she finished speaking, Thaddeus close behind. They took the elevator to the roof, where the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything gleaming and new-washed in the emerging sunlight. The garden was taking shape, raised beds and vertical growing systems, creating an oasis of green against the urban skyline. But Amel barely noticed the progress. His attention was fixed on the small group gathered near the herb garden, where Precious stood facing down Xavier Blackwood and 2 board members. The budget allocations were clearly outlined in the initial proposal, she was saying, her voice calm but firm. The community outreach program is an integral part of the project's social impact goals. "The board is concerned about resource allocation," one of the members replied, his tone condescending. "Perhaps someone with more executive experience should oversee the financial aspects." "Someone like my nephew?" Imara Blackwood's voice cut through the tension as she emerged from the rooftop entrance. "Is that what you're suggesting, Harrison? Because I seem to recall Xavier's last project coming in 30% over budget." The situation devolved into heated discussion, but Amel wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Precious, seeing the barely perceptible tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clasped together to hide their trembling. She maintained her professional composure, but he recognized the look in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in his own mirror all those years ago, when everything he'd worked for had been threatened. "The community program stays," he announced, his voice carrying across the rooftop. Everyone turned, startled by his presence. "Ms. Zuri's vision for this project is exactly what Anders Industries needs. The board's concerns have been noted, but my decision is final." The board members retreated, properly chastised. Xavier lingered for a moment, his expression dark, before following them. Imara gave Precious a supportive squeeze on the shoulder before heading back inside, leaving her alone with Amel in the gleaming aftermath of the rain. She stood among the herbs she'd so carefully planted, their fragrance rising in the humid air. For a moment neither spoke, the city humming far below them, while water dripped softly from the newly installed trellises. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I did." He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "You were right about the community program. About all of it." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he felt something crack inside his chest. "Why do you really support this project, Mr. Anders? And please, don't tell me it's just about corporate sustainability." The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Amel found himself standing closer than he'd intended, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, to notice the way her chest rose and fell with slightly quickened breaths. "I was studying to be a nurse," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if she couldn't hold them back anymore. 3 years of school, working 2 jobs to pay for it. Then my mother got sick. Cancer. The bills. She swallowed hard. Sometimes dreams have to wait. The vulnerability in her voice, the quiet strength with which she shared her pain, moved something in him he'd thought long dead. Before he could stop himself, he was telling her about Valencia, about the betrayal that had shaped the last 25 years of his life. "She almost took everything," he admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "Not just the company, but my ability to trust, to believe in—" He trailed off, unable to say the word that hung between them. "Love." Precious finished softly. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to hold its breath. A clap of thunder broke the moment, making them both jump. The rain returned, fat drops beginning to fall from the sky. They should have run for cover, but neither moved. "We should go inside," Precious said, but she didn't step away. "We should," Amel agreed, watching a raindrop trace its way down her cheek like a tear. Neither moved. The rain fell harder, soaking through their clothes, but still they stood, 2 wounded souls beginning to remember how to trust, how to hope, how to feel. Finally, Precious took a step back, reality reasserting itself. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sharing that with me, and for supporting the project." She turned to go, but Amel caught her hand. The touch was electric, sending sparks of awareness through both of them. "Precious," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I. But the words wouldn't come. 25 years of walls couldn't fall in a single rainy moment, no matter how magical it felt. She squeezed his hand once, gently, before letting go. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." As she walked away, leaving him standing in the rain among the herbs she'd planted, Amel Anders realized something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He was falling in love again, and this time all his carefully constructed walls couldn't protect him. Up in his office, Thaddeus watched through the window as his friend stood in the rain, face turned up to the sky, like a man waking from a long sleep. "Finally," he murmured, pulling out his phone to text Imara. Their 2 friends were healing each other, slowly but surely, and all they could do was watch and hope. The rain continued to fall, washing away old pain, nurturing new growth, while somewhere between earth and sky, 2 hearts began to remember how to bloom. Chapter 5. The Charity Gala. The Anders Industries annual charity gala had always been one of Seattle's most prestigious social events, but this year felt different. The grand ballroom of the Olympic Hotel sparkled with extra brilliance, as if reflecting the subtle changes in its host. Crystal chandeliers cast their warm glow over elegant table settings, while massive arrangements of white orchids, a specific request from Amel Anders himself, filled the air with their delicate fragrance. Cordelia Winters surveyed the scene with barely concealed frustration. For weeks, she'd been trying to convince Amel to escort her niece, Rosalind, to the gala. The girl was perfect on paper, Stanford-educated, from an old Seattle family, and possessed of the kind of refined beauty that belonged in society magazines. Instead, Amel had done the unthinkable. He'd appointed Precious Zuri to the gala's planning committee. "The rooftop garden project has garnered significant media attention," he'd said when questioned about his decision. "Ms. Zuri should be present to discuss its environmental impact." His tone had brooked no argument, though his eyes had softened slightly when Precious's name crossed his lips. Now, standing in the hotel's opulent lobby an hour before the event, Cordelia watched as Seattle's elite began to arrive. Women in designer gowns dripping with jewelry, men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, all of them representing old money, established connections, the kind of people Amel Anders should be focusing on. Instead, his attention was completely captured by the woman descending the grand staircase. Precious Zuri moved with natural grace, wearing a gown that Imara had insisted on lending her. The deep burgundy silk highlighted her rich complexion, while the classic cut spoke of timeless elegance rather than trendy fashion. Her braids had been styled into an intricate updo, small crystal pins catching the light with each step. Amel, standing near the ballroom entrance in his bespoke tuxedo, felt his heart stop for a moment. He'd grown accustomed to seeing Precious in her professional attire, had even seen her in rain-soaked clothes on the rooftop that day. But this was something else entirely. She looked like a queen, regal and self-possessed, yet still unmistakably herself. "Close your mouth, old friend," Thaddeus murmured beside him, amusement clear in his voice. "You're starting to look like a lovesick teenager." Amel managed to compose his features, but his eyes never left Precious as she made her way through the growing crowd. She moved with quiet confidence, stopping to speak with various guests about the garden project. Even those who had initially questioned her appointment found themselves drawn in by her genuine passion and intelligence. "She's a natural," Imara observed, appearing at Amel's other side in a stunning silver gown, "though I suspect you already knew that." Before he could respond, Xavier Blackwood approached Precious with two other board members. Their stance was slightly aggressive, clearly trying to intimidate her in this unfamiliar social setting. Amel started forward, but Thaddeus held him back. "Watch," his friend advised. "She can handle this." Indeed, within minutes, Precious had transformed the confrontation into an impromptu presentation about the garden's community impact. She spoke with such conviction about the project's potential to bridge social divides that even Xavier's companions looked impressed. "Mr. Anders," a silky voice interrupted his observation. "How wonderful to see you again." Amel turned to find Rosalind Winters beside him, wearing an ice blue gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was objectively beautiful, with the kind of polished perfection that came from a lifetime of privilege. Yet all he could think about was how her practiced smile paled in comparison to the genuine warmth of Precious's expressions. "Miss Winters," he acknowledged politely before excusing himself. He had waited long enough. Making his way through the crowd, he approached Precious just as she finished speaking with a group of potential donors. She turned at his approach, and for a moment the bustling ballroom seemed to fade away. "Ms. Zuri," he said softly, "you look—" Words failed him, something that hadn't happened in a business setting for decades. A slight blush colored her cheeks, but her eyes met his steadily. "Thank you, Mr. Anders. You look very handsome as well." The orchestra began to play, a waltz that filled the grand space with sweeping romance. Around them, couples moved toward the dance floor, but they remained in their own private bubble of awareness. "Would you dance with me?" he asked, extending his hand. Precious hesitated for a fraction of a second. She could feel the eyes of Seattle's elite on them, could practically hear the whispers starting. "Are you sure that's wise?" "No," he admitted with a small smile, "but I'm asking anyway." She placed her hand in his, and the world shifted on its axis. He led her onto the dance floor with the same quiet authority he brought to everything, but his touch was gentle, almost reverent. As they began to move to the music, the years of social dancing lessons his mother had insisted upon came flooding back. They fit together perfectly, as if they'd been dancing all their lives. Precious followed his lead with natural grace, while Amel guided them through the steps with growing confidence. The silk of her gown whispered against the marble floor, and the scent of her perfume, jasmine again, mixed with the fragrance of the orchids. "Everyone's watching," she murmured, though her eyes never left his. "Let them," he replied, his voice low and intense. "You're the only one I see." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Precious felt her heart racing, knew she should maintain professional distance. remember all the reasons why this was a bad idea. But in that moment, with his hand warm against her back and his eyes holding hers, all her carefully constructed arguments seemed to fade away. From the edge of the dance floor, Thaddeus and Imara watched with matching smiles. "About time," Imara said softly, "though this will certainly set tongues wagging." "Let them talk," Thaddeus replied. "Look at his face, Imara. When was the last time you saw him look like that?" Indeed, Amel's usual mask of corporate authority had softened into something almost boyish. As he guided Precious through a turn, the hint of a real smile played around his lips, reaching all the way to his eyes. The dance ended too soon, but neither moved to step apart immediately. For a brief moment, they stood close enough to feel each other's heartbeat, the rest of the world a distant blur of light and sound. "Thank you for the dance," Precious said finally, her voice slightly breathless. "Thank you for trusting me to lead," he replied, the words carrying double meaning. The spell was broken by the approach of more potential donors, eager to hear about the garden project. Precious slipped smoothly into her professional role, but throughout the evening her eyes kept finding his across the crowded room. Later, as the gala wound down and guests began to depart, Amel found her on the hotel's terrace. She stood gazing out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like stars. "It was a successful evening," she said, as he joined her at the railing. "The project received significant pledges of support." "It wasn't the project they were impressed by," he said quietly. "It was you." She turned to look at him, and once again that electric awareness crackled between them. "Mr. Anders, Amel," he interrupted, "please, when we're alone like this, call me Amel." The intimacy of using his first name made her breath catch. "Amel," she said softly, testing the feel of it on her tongue. "We should be careful. The rumors—" "I don't care about rumors," he said, taking a step closer. "For the first time in 25 years, I find myself caring about something far more important." The night air was cool, but Precious felt warm everywhere his gaze touched her. She knew she should step back, maintain professional boundaries, protect her heart. Instead, she found herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had been drawing them together since that first morning among the orchids. A burst of laughter from inside the ballroom broke the moment. Reality rushed back in, reminding them of who they were and all the complications that came with their positions. "I should go," Precious said reluctantly. "It's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Let me have my driver take you home," Amel offered, not ready to end their evening. She shook her head, smiling softly. "I'll take a cab, but thank you for everything tonight." As she turned to go, he caught her hand, just as he had that day in the rain. "Precious." She squeezed his fingers gently before letting go. "Good night, Amel." He watched her walk away, the burgundy silk of her gown catching the light one last time before she disappeared inside. His hand still tingled where she had touched it, and his heart felt lighter than it had in decades. From the ballroom doorway, Cordelia Winters watched with narrowed eyes. This was not how things were supposed to go. Her niece Rosalind was perfectly suited to be Mrs. Amel Anders, not some maintenance coordinator turned sustainability director. But as she observed Amel's expression as he stared after Precious, soft, vulnerable, almost young again, she realized with sinking certainty that her carefully laid plans were crumbling. The Ice King of Seattle's business world was thawing, and all because of a woman who had never sought to capture him in the first place. The last guests departed, leaving the ballroom echoing with the ghosts of music and laughter. But up on the terrace, Amel Anders stood a while longer, remembering the feel of Precious in his arms as they danced, the way her eyes had shone in the starlight, the sound of his name on her lips. For the first time since Valencia's betrayal, he found himself willing to risk his heart again. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it filled him with a quiet joy, like watching the first green shoots break through soil in their rooftop garden. Sometimes he was beginning to realize the most beautiful things grew in the most unexpected places. Chapter 6. Office Politics. The Monday morning after the charity gala dawned with an undercurrent of tension crackling through Anders Industries like static before a storm. Every desk, every break room, every elevator held whispered conversations about the photographs splashed across Seattle's society pages. Amel Anders and Precious Zuri dancing, their eyes locked in a way that spoke volumes. Xavier Blackwood stood in his corner office, the morning sunlight catching the edge of his Harvard MBA diploma as he stared at the newspaper spread across his imported mahogany desk. His manicured finger traced the caption beneath the photo. Anders Industries CEO shares a dance with sustainability director during annual charity gala. The word shares had been deliberately chosen, he was sure, to avoid more romantic implications, but the chemistry between them was undeniable in the image. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to his visitor, Rosalind Winters, who perched elegantly on his leather sofa. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than most employees' monthly salary, a fact she wore like armor. First the maintenance position, then the sudden promotion to sustainability director, now this public display. Rosalind's perfectly manicured nails, the same shade of red as her Louboutin heels, drummed against her Hermès handbag. "Aunt Cordelia is beside herself," she said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of old. "Seattle money and private school education. She's spent years trying to find the perfect match for Amel, cultivating connections, arranging chance meetings at charity events. Now he's falling for some facility worker." The disdain in her voice matched the bitterness Xavier had been nursing since Precious's promotion. He'd worked his way up through proper channels: prep school, Ivy League, MBA, carefully cultivated connections. Yet here was this outsider, this nobody, suddenly wielding influence over the company's most prestigious new initiative and, apparently, its CEO's heart. "Something needs to be done," he said, moving to stand by his window. From here, he could see the rooftop garden taking shape, a constant reminder of how Precious had somehow managed to insert herself into the company's upper echelons. "The board is already questioning the resources being directed to her projects." "Carefully," Rosalind cautioned, though her eyes gleamed with malicious interest. "After that disaster with Valencia Pierce, Amel is particularly sensitive to any hint of manipulation or betrayal. One wrong move, and it could backfire spectacularly." Xavier's lip curled at the mention of Valencia. Everyone in Seattle's business circles knew the story, how the ambitious socialite had nearly succeeded in wresting control of Anders Industries from its young founder through a combination of seduction and corporate espionage. The scandal had been carefully buried, but its effects had shaped company culture for 25 years. "Perhaps," he said slowly, pulling up financial reports on his computer, "it's time to remind everyone of that particular chapter in company history. The parallels are interesting, wouldn't you say? A beautiful young woman from a modest background, a rapid rise through company ranks, increasingly personal involvement with the CEO." Rosalind leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. The board would certainly be concerned about history repeating itself, especially if someone were to point out certain irregularities in project budgets. "Exactly," Xavier smiled, a predatory expression that had nothing to do with joy. A careful audit of the sustainability initiative, questions about resource allocation, concerns about professional boundaries. But before their plotting could progress further, a knock at the door interrupted them. Imara Blackwood entered, her elegant figure commanding attention despite Xavier's obvious annoyance at the intrusion. Her custom-tailored suit spoke of success earned through merit rather than inheritance, and her expression carried years of experience dealing with corporate politics. "Nephew," she said, her British accent particularly crisp. "Miss Winters, how lovely to see you both engaged in what I'm sure is completely innocent conversation about company matters." The warning in her tone was clear. As HR director, Imara had both the authority and the inclination to make life difficult for anyone causing trouble in her domain. The fact that Xavier was her nephew had never stopped her from maintaining professional standards. "Aunt Imara," Xavier acknowledged stiffly. "We were just discussing the gala's success." "Indeed." Her arched eyebrows spoke volumes. "Then you'll be pleased to know that the publicity has already resulted in several major corporations expressing interest in implementing similar sustainability initiatives. Ms. Zuri will be presenting her proposals to their boards next week." The news hit Xavier like a physical blow. More success for Precious meant more legitimacy, more influence, more reasons for Amel to keep her close. He forced his features into a neutral expression, but his hands clenched beneath his desk. "How progressive of them," Rosalind commented, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Though one hopes they've properly vetted the program's leadership. In today's climate, companies can't be too careful about governance and oversight." Imara's gaze sharpened. "Indeed, Miss Winters, speaking of oversight, the HR department is conducting a comprehensive review of all internal communications regarding personnel matters. We wouldn't want any unfortunate rumors damaging the company's reputation." The threat was subtle but clear. Xavier watched his aunt leave, frustration building in his chest. But rather than deterring him, the interaction only strengthened his resolve. He turned to Rosalind once the door closed. "We need to move faster," he said quietly, "before she becomes untouchable." Meanwhile, several floors above, Precious sat in her new office, a modest but well-lit space with a view of the rooftop garden. She was reviewing the latest progress reports when a subtle commotion in the hallway caught her attention. A group of maintenance staff huddled near the water cooler, their voices carrying despite their attempts at whispers. "Did you see the paper?" one asked. The way he was looking at her. "It's like a fairy tale," another sighed. "From maintenance to dancing with the CEO." "More like a calculated climb up the corporate ladder," a third voice cut in, one of Xavier's loyal supporters. "We all know how this story ends. Just ask Valencia Pierce." Precious's hands tightened on her report, but her face remained carefully neutral. She'd known the rumors would start, had expected the accusations. What she hadn't expected was how much they would hurt, how the insinuations would echo her own deepest fears. A knock at her door provided welcome interruption. Thaddeus Kingston filled the frame, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. "Got a minute?" he asked, though he was already closing the door behind him. Precious gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting how even someone of Thaddeus's size seemed to relax in her presence. She'd decorated the office with potted herbs and air-purifying plants, creating a space that felt more like a garden sanctuary than a corporate workspace. "The rumor mill is working overtime," he said, without preamble. "Though I suspect you've noticed." "It's to be expected," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "My position here is unconventional." "Your position here is earned," Thaddeus corrected firmly. "I've known Amel Anders for 30 years. He doesn't make decisions based on anything but merit. Not anymore." The "not anymore" hung in the air between them, heavy with history. Precious had heard whispers about Valencia Pierce, but the full story remained shrouded in corporate legend. "I'm not interested in company politics," she said finally. "I'm here to do a job, to create something meaningful." "Which is exactly why you belong here," a new voice joined their conversation. Amel stood in the doorway, his imposing figure softened somehow by the morning light filtering through the plants in Precious's office. Their eyes met, and for a moment the rest of the world faded away. Thaddeus cleared his throat pointedly. "I should go check on those quarterly reports," he said, rising with a knowing smile. As he passed Amel, he clapped his friend on the shoulder, a gesture of support that spoke volumes. Once they were alone, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Amel moved further into the office, drawn as always into Precious's orbit. "I'm sorry about the newspapers," he said quietly. "I should have anticipated the photographers." "You're not responsible for other people's assumptions," she replied, standing to face him. In her heels, she was tall enough to look him directly in the eye. "Though perhaps we should be more careful." "Is that what you want?" he asked, taking a step closer. "To be careful?" The question carried weight far beyond its simple words. Precious felt her heart racing, remembering the feel of his hand on her waist as they danced, the way the world had seemed to stop when their eyes met. "What I want," she said slowly, "and what's wise are often two different things. They don't have to be." Another step closer. "Precious." A commotion in the hallway broke the moment. Xavier's voice carried through the door, deliberately loud, as he led a group of board members on a tour of the facility. "Of course, the maintenance department has been quite ambitious lately," they heard him say. "Though some might question the wisdom of such rapid advancement without proper qualifications." Precious stiffened, but before she could respond, Amel had already turned toward the door, his expression thunderous. She caught his arm. "Don't," she said firmly. "This is my battle to fight." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. The strength he saw there, the quiet dignity, made him fall a little more in love with her. "At least let me help," he said softly. She shook her head, a small smile playing around her lips. "You already have. You gave me a chance. That's all I needed." With that, she squared her shoulders and walked out to face Xavier and his entourage. Her voice carried back to Amel's ears, clear and professional, as she began an impromptu presentation on the garden project's progress and its measurable impact on employee wellness. He watched from her office doorway as she handled the situation with grace and composure, turning potential humiliation into an opportunity to showcase her expertise. The board members were soon nodding along, clearly impressed, while Xavier's face grew increasingly sour. "Remarkable woman," Imara observed, appearing silently beside him. "Rather like watching a master class in professional dignity, isn't it?" "She shouldn't have to prove herself like this," Amel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No," Imara agreed, "but the fact that she can and does it with such grace is exactly why she's worthy of her position." She paused, giving him a meaningful look. And anything else she might want. The implication wasn't lost on him. As CEO, his personal choices had always been subject to public scrutiny. But for the first time in 25 years, he found himself not caring about appearances or expectations. Later that afternoon, Precious found a delivery on her desk, a single orchid in a simple glass vase, its petals the exact shade of burgundy she'd worn at the gala. The card read simply, "Some things are worth the risk." She touched the delicate bloom, remembering that first morning among the orchids in the lobby, how far she'd come since then. The rumors would continue, the challenges would persist. But in that moment, looking at the flower that symbolized their beginning, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking after all. Outside her office, Seattle's rain began to fall, washing away the last of summer's heat. But inside, surrounded by the plants she'd carefully chosen, and the silent support of the man who'd seen her worth from the very beginning, Precious Zuri felt nothing but warmth. Chapter 7. The first move. The rooftop garden glowed in the twilight, each plant and flower outlined in the golden light of sunset, The day's heat lingered in the stone pathways, releasing the mingled fragrances of lavender, rosemary, and lemon balm into the evening air. Most of Anders Industries' employees had gone home hours ago, leaving the space in peaceful silence, broken only by the gentle whir of the irrigation systems and the distant hum of city traffic far below. Precious stood among the medicinal herbs, her fingers gently brushing the velvet leaves of sage. Her heels had been discarded hours ago, replaced by the comfortable flats she kept in her office. Her professional blazer hung over a nearby bench, and her hair, loosened from its usual neat style, caught the last rays of sunlight. Here, surrounded by the growing things she tended, she looked most like herself, a woman who found peace in nurturing life. The sound of the rooftop door opening didn't surprise her. These late evening inspections had become an unspoken ritual, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. She knew his footsteps now, could distinguish them from anyone else's without turning around. "The chamomile is flowering," she said, her voice soft in the evening quiet. "And the echinacea has doubled in size since last week. The soil composition adjustments are working." Amel moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. Like her, he'd shed some of his corporate armor. His tie was loose, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. In the fading light, he looked less like the intimidating CEO and more like the man beneath the title. "You've created something extraordinary here," he said quietly, his eyes taking in not just the thriving plants, but the whole transformed space. What had once been bare concrete and utility units was now a living, breathing ecosystem. Vertical gardens climbed the walls, their cascading greenery softening the urban edges. Raised beds burst with herbs and vegetables, while carefully planned seating areas invited contemplation and rest. "We all did," she corrected, though her heart warmed at his praise. "Every person who's contributed to this garden has left their mark on it." They stood in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight painted the garden in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, a container ship moved slowly across Elliott Bay, its lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The moment felt suspended, like a drop of dew before it falls. "I've never told anyone about Valencia," Amel said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear in the evening air. "Not the whole story. Not even Thaddeus knows all of it." Precious turned to look at him, struck by the vulnerability in his tone. His profile was sharp against the darkening sky, but his usual mask of corporate authority had softened into something more human, more real. "You don't have to," she began, but he shook his head. "I want to," he said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "With you, I want to." They moved to one of the garden's seating areas, a comfortable bench surrounded by fragrant herbs. The city spread out below them like a carpet of lights, while above, the first stars began to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "I was 23, he began, his voice taking on a distant quality. "The company was just beginning to take off. I thought I had everything figured out, young, successful, unstoppable." A bitter smile crossed his face. The perfect target. Precious listened silently as he shared the full story of meeting Valencia Pierce at a charity event. How she had seemed different from the other social climbers, more genuine, more interested in his dreams than his bank account. How quickly he had fallen for her carefully crafted persona. "She was brilliant," he admitted, pain and admiration mixing in his voice. "She gained my trust inch by inch, always making me feel like I was the one in control. By the time I realized what was happening, she had access to everything: company accounts, board contacts, strategic plans." His hands clenched into fists as he described discovering her true nature. The secret meetings with competitors, the carefully orchestrated plan to take control of the company, the web of lies that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, he said quietly, staring out at the city lights. It was realizing that every moment I thought was real, every intimate conversation, every shared dream, it was all calculated. She never saw me, never cared about me. I was just a means to an end. Without thinking, Precious reached out and covered his clenched fist with her hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt him release a breath he seemed to have been holding for 25 years. His fingers immediately relaxed, twining with hers as if they'd been doing this for years instead of seconds. After that, he continued, his thumb absently stroking her palm in a way that sent shivers up her arm, it seemed safer to keep everyone at a distance. Business relationships, professional courtesy, nothing more. Until ... Until? She prompted softly when he trailed off. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. Until I walked into the lobby one morning and found someone who saw past all the walls I'd built. Someone who cared more about nurturing growth than climbing corporate ladders. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, making her heart race. But Precious knew it was her turn to be brave, to offer truth for truth. I've never told anyone about giving up nursing school, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone just assumes I couldn't afford it, or wasn't cut out for it. The truth is, I chose to leave. Now it was Amel's turn to listen as she described her mother's devastating cancer diagnosis, the brutal rounds of chemotherapy, the mounting medical bills that threatened to drown them. How she'd tried to maintain her studies while working 2 jobs and caring for her mom until something had to give. The night I made the decision, she continued, squeezing his hand as if drawing strength from the connection. Mom was having a particularly bad reaction to the treatment. She needed someone to hold her hair back, to rub her back, to just be there, and I realized that's what healing really is. Sometimes it's not about medical degrees or prestigious careers. Sometimes it's just about being present, about helping things grow and heal in whatever way we can. She gestured to the garden around them, her free hand encompassing the space she'd helped create. This is my way of still being a healer. Every person who finds peace here, every community member who learns to grow their own food, every employee who takes a moment to breathe and reconnect with nature, they're all part of the healing process. Amel watched her speak with growing wonder. This remarkable woman had taken her own pain and transformed it into something beautiful, something that helped others, just as she'd helped him begin to thaw his frozen heart. I've never told anyone that before, she admitted, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. I've never told anyone about Valencia, he replied softly. I guess we're both learning to trust again. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. The garden's herbs released their fragrance into the cooling evening air, lavender for peace, rosemary for remembrance, lemon balm for healing, while the city lights twinkled below like fallen stars. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Amel raised their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost courtly, but the tenderness behind it made Precious's heart skip a beat. Thank you, he whispered against her skin, for showing me that not all growth has to be painful. She responded by squeezing his hand, wordlessly acknowledging the trust he'd placed in her. They sat together in comfortable silence as true night fell, neither willing to break the spell of this moment when masks had fallen and truth had bloomed like the flowers surrounding them. Far below, Seattle continued its endless dance of light and shadow, but up in their rooftop sanctuary, 2 souls had taken the first real step toward healing old wounds and nurturing new beginnings. Like the medicinal herbs around them, They had found that sometimes the most powerful healing comes from simply being present, being real, and allowing love to grow in its own time. Chapter 8. Weekend Surprises. Saturday mornings at Anders Industries were usually quiet, the building operating on minimal staff. But this particular dawn found Anders in his office, suit jacket draped over his chair, sleeves rolled up as he reviewed final details with Thaddeus and Imara. The past week since their rooftop conversation had shifted something fundamental between him and Precious, and he was determined to show her that he understood her dreams. "The medical equipment arrives in an hour," Thaddeus reported, checking his tablet. "Dr. Elena Rivera will oversee the clinic setup. Her reputation for community healthcare is impeccable." "And the educational program structure?" Amel asked, his eyes scanning the detailed plans spread across his desk. Imara smiled, a rare expression of pure approval on her elegant features. "All arranged. We've partnered with 3 local nursing schools to provide mentorship opportunities. The students will get hands-on experience while working under licensed professionals." The basement of Anders Industries had been transformed over the past week. What was once storage space now housed a state-of-the-art free health clinic, complete with examination rooms, a teaching area, and even a small medicinal herb garden that connected to their rooftop project. "Miss Zuri's appointment is scheduled for 10 a.m., Cordelia announced, entering with fresh coffee for everyone. Her initial resistance to Precious had softened after witnessing how the younger woman's influence had brought positive changes to both the company and its CEO. "She thinks she's coming in for a routine inspection of the basement ventilation systems." Amel nodded, trying to control the nervous energy that had him straightening his tie for the 10th time that morning. He wanted everything to be perfect, wanted to show Precious that he not only understood her dream of helping others, but was committed to helping her achieve it. "Relax," Thaddeus said quietly, as Cordelia and Imara left to oversee final preparations. "This is exactly what she's always wanted to do. You're giving her back her dream." "I just hope she doesn't see it as overstepping," Amel replied, voicing the concern that had kept him awake for days. "The last thing I want is for her to think I'm trying to buy her affection." "Anyone who knows Precious would never think that," his friend assured him. "And anyone who knows you can see this isn't about impressing her, it's about understanding her." At precisely 10 a.m., the elevator doors opened on the basement level, and Precious stepped out, clipboard in hand. She wore casual clothes appropriate for a weekend inspection, dark jeans, a soft blue blouse, and practical flats. Her braids were pulled back in a simple style, and she wore minimal makeup. Yet to Amel, watching her approach through the security feed, she had never looked more beautiful. She was frowning slightly at her clipboard when she rounded the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Where there should have been storage units and cleaning supplies, she found herself staring at a modern medical facility. The walls were painted in soothing colors, with murals of healing herbs and natural scenes. State-of-the-art equipment gleamed under professional lighting, while a team of medical staff arranged supplies and prepared for opening day. "What?" she breathed, her clipboard falling forgotten to her side. "Welcome to the Anders Industries Community Health Initiative," Amel's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, looking somewhat nervous, despite his usual confident demeanor. "I hope you don't mind that we borrowed some ideas from your rooftop garden project." Indeed, the clinic's waiting area featured living walls of medicinal plants, creating a healing atmosphere that bridged traditional and modern medicine. Through glass doors, she could see an education space where future healthcare workers could learn and train. "I don't understand," she said, though her heart was racing with growing comprehension. "How? Why?" "Because you were right," he said softly, moving closer. "Healing isn't just about prestigious careers or medical degrees. It's about being present, about helping people in whatever way we can. He gestured to the space around them. This clinic will provide free healthcare to the community, while also offering educational opportunities for aspiring medical professionals who might otherwise face the same impossible choice you did. Precious felt tears welling in her eyes as she took in every detail. The herb garden that would provide natural remedies, the comfortable consultation rooms designed to put patients at ease, the teaching areas where students could learn and grow. "You remembered," she whispered. "Everything I said about wanting to help people, about making healthcare accessible." "I listened to you," he said simply. "Even when you think I'm just being polite, even when you're talking about soil pH levels or proper pruning techniques. I hear you, Precious. I see you." The words hit her heart like a physical force. In a world where so many people had dismissed her dreams or tried to reshape them into something more suitable, here was a man who had taken those dreams and helped them bloom. "Dr. Rivera," Amel called out, and a distinguished woman in her 50s approached them. "This is Precious Zuri, our sustainability director, and now, if she's willing, the coordinator for our educational outreach program." "Ms. Zuri," Dr. Rivera said warmly, "I've heard wonderful things about your work with community gardens. I believe your expertise in natural medicine and sustainable practices will be invaluable to our program." Precious could barely speak past the emotion tightening her throat. This wasn't just a gesture of affection, it was a deep understanding of who she was and what she valued. Amel hadn't tried to simply resurrect her old dream of being a nurse. He had helped her create something new that incorporated all aspects of her journey. "Would you like a tour?" he asked softly. "There's more to show you." She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. As they walked through the facility, each new detail showed how much thought had gone into the project. The children's area featured interactive displays about healthy eating and garden science. The pharmacy included a section dedicated to natural remedies, complete with educational materials about integrating traditional and modern medicine. "The rooftop garden will supply fresh herbs and vegetables," Amel explained as they reached the connecting greenhouse. "We've already partnered with local schools to provide educational programs about nutrition and sustainable agriculture." "This is—" Precious stopped, overwhelmed by the scope of what he had created. "Amel, this is more than I ever dreamed possible." He turned to face her fully, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "You gave me back my ability to dream, Precious. To see beyond profit margins and corporate strategies to what really matters. This—" He gestured to the clinic around them. "This is just me trying to return the favor." A commotion at the main entrance drew their attention. A group of nursing students had arrived for orientation, their excited voices filling the space with energy and possibility. Among them, Precious recognized several faces from the youth center where she volunteered. Young people who had feared their dreams of medical careers were out of reach. "You listened," she said again, tears finally spilling over. "You really listened to my dreams." Amel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "How could I not? You've been listening to mine since that first morning among the orchids, even when I didn't know I still had any." The touch of his hand on her face sent warmth spreading through her entire body. Around them, the clinic hummed with preparation for opening day, but in that moment they might as well have been alone in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. "Not just for this, but for seeing me. The real me. Always," he promised softly. And in that one word was every declaration of love neither of them was quite ready to voice aloud. The moment was broken by Thaddeus clearing his throat nearby. "Sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Rivera needs some final approvals before we open tomorrow." Precious stepped back reluctantly, wiping away her tears with a small laugh. "I must look a mess." "You look beautiful," Amel said with such simple honesty that her heart skipped a beat. "Go on, help them get everything ready. This is your project now, too." She gave him one last wondering look before joining Dr. Rivera and the staff, her natural leadership abilities immediately coming to the fore as she helped organize the final preparations. Thaddeus moved to stand beside his friend, watching Precious guide the nursing students through the herb garden with infectious enthusiasm. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you put so much thought into a gift." "It's not a gift," Amel replied, his eyes never leaving Precious. "It's a future, one I hope we'll build together." As the day progressed, the clinic came fully to life. Community members who had heard about the project began stopping by, curious about the new facility. Precious moved among them with grace and purpose, her joy in the project evident in every interaction. By sunset, when most of the staff had gone home, she found Amel in the herb garden, examining a lavender plant with careful attention. "You've created something miraculous here," she said softly. He turned to her with a smile that made him look years younger. "No, we have. Everything I build from now on, I want to build with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise. And this time, when he reached for her hand, she met him halfway. Chapter 9. The Storm. The autumn rain lashed against the windows of Anders Industries, matching the tension that crackled through the executive floor. Precious stood in her office, watching water stream down the glass, while her mind tried to process the morning's events, the peace they'd found in recent weeks, the quiet joy of building something meaningful together, had been shattered by a single email. Valencia Pierce was back in Seattle. The news had spread through the company like wildfire, carried on whispers and worried glances. Even those too young to remember the original scandal knew the story. The beautiful socialite who had nearly destroyed both Anders Industries and its founder through a carefully orchestrated campaign of seduction and corporate espionage. Now, 25 years later, she wanted to make amends. "It's a trap," Thaddeus had declared immediately upon hearing the news. "She's seen the company's recent success in the press, especially the sustainability initiatives. She's looking for another angle." But Precious's concern wasn't for the company. It was for Amel. She'd seen his face when Cordelia delivered the message, seen the old pain flash across his features before his corporate mask slammed back into place. He'd immediately thrown himself into meetings, avoiding any opportunity for private conversation. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Imara entered, her usual elegance somewhat tense around the edges. "She's here," the HR director said without preamble. "In the lobby, asking to see you specifically." Precious felt her heart skip a beat, but her voice remained steady. "Not Amel?" "Oh, she asked for him too," Imara replied with a grimace. "But apparently she has some friendly advice she feels compelled to share with you first." Taking a deep breath, Precious smoothed her dark green silk blouse, a recent purchase that matched her growing confidence in her role. "Then I suppose I shouldn't keep her waiting." The elevator ride to the lobby felt longer than usual. Precious used the time to center herself, drawing strength from everything she and Amel had built together, the rooftop garden, the community clinic, the trust that had grown between them like carefully tended flowers. Valencia Pierce stood examining the lobby's orchid display, the same ones Precious had been tending that first morning she met Amel. At 50, Valencia remained strikingly beautiful. Her silver-streaked dark hair styled perfectly, her designer outfit screaming old money and influence. "Miss Pierce," Precious said calmly, approaching with professional courtesy, "welcome to Anders Industries." Valencia turned, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes as she assessed the younger woman. "Ms. Zuri, how kind of you to meet with me. I've read so much about your rapid rise within the company." The implied criticism rolled off Precious like water. She'd faced far worse from those who doubted her abilities. "Would you like to see the sustainability initiatives you've been reading about? The rooftop garden is quite impressive, even in the rain." "Actually," Valencia's voice took on a concerned tone that set off warning bells in Precious's mind, "I was hoping to speak with you privately, woman to woman, about Amel." They settled in one of the lobby's private meeting areas, the rain creating a steady backdrop to their conversation. Valencia sat with practiced grace, every movement calculated for maximum effect. "You seem like an intelligent woman," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Surely you've noticed Amel's controlling tendencies? The way he needs to oversee every detail, manage every aspect of both business and personal relationships?" Precious kept her expression neutral, though internally she marveled at how differently two people could see the same man. Where Valencia saw control, Precious had experienced support. Where the older woman perceived manipulation, Precious had found genuine understanding. "Mr. Anders is thorough in his business practices," she replied diplomatically. "It served the company well." Valencia's smile turned predatory. "Oh, my dear, you're still in the golden phase, aren't you? When every gesture seems romantic rather than calculated. When every business opportunity feels like a gift rather than a chain." The reference to the clinic made Precious's hands clench briefly in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "Why are you really here, Ms. Pierce?" "To warn you," Valencia leaned forward, dropping her voice conspiratorially. "I was young once too, dazzled by his attention, his grand gestures, his apparent generosity. But it all comes with a price. He'll remake you in his image of perfection, control every aspect of your life until you can't breathe without his permission." The words hung in the air between them, and Precious felt a surge of pity for this woman who had never really known Amel at all, who had been so focused on manipulating him that she'd missed the genuine heart beneath his professional exterior. "You're wrong," Precious said simply, rising from her seat. "And I think you know you are. The man you're describing, that's the armor he built because of you. The real Amel Anders is someone who listens to dreams he doesn't fully understand and helps them grow, who creates opportunities for others without asking anything in return, who's learned that true strength lies in being vulnerable enough to trust again." Valencia's carefully constructed mask slipped for a moment, showing genuine surprise at the quiet conviction in Precious's voice. "I appreciate your concern," Precious continued, her tone professional but firm, "but I know exactly who Amel is. More importantly, I know who I am. No one can remake me into anything I don't choose to be." The sound of footsteps made them both turn. Amel stood in the lobby entrance, his tall frame tense as he took in the scene before him. The years fell away for a moment as he faced his past, but then his eyes found Precious's, and the present reasserted itself with crystal clarity. "Valencia," he said, his voice controlled, "I believe we have nothing to discuss." "Don't you even want to hear my apology?" Valencia asked, rising gracefully. "My explanation for what happened all those years ago?" "No," he replied simply, moving to stand beside Precious. "The past is done. I've found something far more valuable than explanations or apologies. I've found truth." His hand found Precious's, their fingers intertwining naturally, and Valencia's expression shifted as she finally understood. This wasn't the same man she'd manipulated all those years ago. This, Amel Anders, stood firmly grounded in his own strength, supported by a woman who matched him in dignity and purpose. "Well," Valencia said, gathering her designer bag. It seems my concern was unnecessary, though I do hope, Miss Zuri, that you remember our conversation when the winds change. The only thing changing here, Precious replied with quiet confidence, is the season. Our garden is quite beautiful in autumn, Miss Pierce. You should visit again when the healing herbs are in full bloom. The subtle emphasis on healing wasn't lost on any of them. Valencia left with as much grace as she could muster, her stilettos clicking across the marble floor like fading thunder. When she was gone, Amel turned to Precious, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right? What did she say to you?" Precious squeezed his hand gently. "Nothing that matters. She was describing a man I've never met, and never will, because he doesn't exist except in her imagination." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "When Cordelia told me she was here to see you, I thought that I might believe her version of you over everything I've seen with my own eyes." Precious shook her head with a small smile. "Amel, I know who you are. I've seen your heart in every detail of the clinic, in every support you've given to your employees, in every moment you've respected my independence while offering your strength." He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture of pure relief and trust. Around them, the rain continued to fall, but they stood in their own pocket of peace, stronger together than any storm from the past. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in the man I am, not the man she tried to make me." Precious reached up to touch his face gently. "Thank you for being exactly who you are, someone who helps dreams grow, even when they're not his own." The storm outside began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds to paint the lobby in soft gold. Like their rooftop garden after rain, something new had bloomed between them. A deeper trust, a stronger bond, a love that could weather any storm because it was rooted in truth. Chapter 10. Truth and Trust. The community health clinic buzzed with activity as Precious made her morning rounds. 3 months after opening, the facility had already become a vital resource for Seattle's underserved communities. Medical students worked alongside experienced professionals, while the waiting area was filled with patients benefiting from the unique blend of traditional and modern medicine. But today, something felt off. Dr. Rivera pulled her aside as soon as she arrived, concern etched on her experienced features. "We need to talk," she said quietly, leading Precious to her office. "There's an issue with the funding." Inside, they found Thaddeus already waiting, his usually cheerful face uncharacteristically serious. "The board is questioning the clinic's budget allocation," he explained without preamble. "Xavier Blackwood has been particularly vocal about the excessive resources being directed here." Precious felt her heart sink as they laid out the details. Xavier had presented a compelling case for redirecting the clinic's funding to more profitable ventures. His argument was backed by carefully manipulated statistics that made the clinic appear less efficient than it actually was. "The vote is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Thaddeus continued. "Without those funds, we'll have to significantly reduce services, maybe even close the educational program." Precious thought of the students she'd mentored, the community members who relied on the clinic, the delicate balance of trust they'd built. "There has to be a way to show the real impact we're making here." "There is," Dr. Rivera said hesitantly, "but it would require creative accounting, making our numbers look better than they are, just like Xavier made them look worse." The implication hung heavy in the air. They could fight fire with fire, manipulate their own statistics to ensure continued funding. It would be easy to justify. They were doing good work, helping people who truly needed it. The end could justify the means. But Precious knew better. Everything they'd built here was founded on trust and integrity. Once that foundation cracked, the whole structure would be compromised. "No," she said firmly. We'll present the truth, every success, every struggle, every lesson learned. If we can't win this fight honestly, we don't deserve to win it at all. She spent the rest of the day gathering real stories, real data, real evidence of the clinic's impact. Students shared how the program had changed their lives. Patients testified about receiving care they couldn't have accessed elsewhere. Community leaders spoke about the ripple effects of having accessible healthcare in their neighborhoods. As evening fell, she made her way to Amel's office to share what she'd learned. Their relationship had deepened since Valencia's visit, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. But this would test that foundation. "You wanted to see me?" he said as she entered, looking up from his desk with the warm smile he reserved just for her. "We need to talk about the clinic," she began, laying out everything she'd discovered. She watched his expression shift as he understood the implications. This wasn't just about the clinic anymore. This was about corporate politics, about his nephew's attempts to undermine their work, about the choice between expedience and integrity. "We could adjust the numbers," he said carefully, testing her reaction. "Make sure the board sees the clinic's full potential." "No," she replied quietly but firmly. "That's not who we are. That's not what we're building here." Their eyes met across the desk, and something powerful passed between them. Here was the moment of truth. Would he support her commitment to integrity, even if it meant risking something they'd built together? "Tell me what you need," he said simply, and her heart swelled with love for this man who continued to choose truth over expedience. They worked late into the night, preparing a presentation that laid bare both the clinic's successes and its challenges. Precious insisted on including everything: the startup struggles, the learning curves, the areas still needing improvement. But she also showcased the real, measurable impact they were having on the community. The next morning, she stood before the board with quiet confidence. Xavier sat with a smug smile, certain his manipulated statistics would carry the day. But he hadn't counted on the power of truth told with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Precious began, "I'm not here to show you perfect numbers or promise immediate returns. I'm here to show you something far more valuable, real change happening in real people's lives." For the next hour, she laid out their story. She didn't shy away from the challenges, but she also helped the board see the bigger picture: how the clinic was training the next generation of healthcare workers, how it was building trust with underserved communities, how it was pioneering a new model of integrated care that could be replicated across the country. "We could make these numbers look better," she admitted honestly. "We could manipulate statistics like others have manipulated them to look worse, but that would betray everything this clinic stands for. We're not just treating illnesses here. We're building trust, creating opportunities, growing something sustainable." She saw Xavier's smile fade as the board members began nodding along. Her honest approach had accomplished what his manipulation couldn't. It had made them believe in the vision. When the vote came, the funding was not only secured, but increased. Board members who had been skeptical became advocates, impressed by both the clinic's impact and the integrity of its leadership. Later, in their rooftop garden, Precious and Amel stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of victory. "You took a huge risk today," he said softly, "standing up for the truth when an easier path was available." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with conviction. "Some things are worth the risk: integrity, trust, the chance to build something real. These aren't just corporate values. They're the foundation of everything meaningful in life." He pulled her close, overwhelmed by the strength of his feelings for this remarkable woman. "I fall more in love with you every day," he whispered against her hair. "You make me want to be better, to build something worthy of the trust you show in always choosing truth." Below them, the clinic hummed with evening activity, while above, the first stars began to appear. They had weathered another storm together, emerging stronger for having faced it with honesty and courage. In the garden they'd created, surrounded by the healing herbs they'd planted together, Precious and Amel held each other close, knowing that their love, like their work, was built on the unshakable foundation of truth and trust. Chapter 11. The Decision. The evening light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Amel Ander's office, casting long shadows across the space where he had spent the majority of his adult life. 25 years of decisions had been made within these walls, choices that had shaped not only his future, but the lives of thousands of employees. Now, as he stood watching Seattle's skyline fade into twilight, he faced perhaps his most significant decision yet. The papers on his desk represented months of careful planning with Thaddeus, the restructuring of Anders Industries that would allow him to step back from his role as CEO. The transition had been meticulously designed. Thaddeus would take over day-to-day operations, while Amel would focus on the charitable foundation that would support healthcare initiatives and community outreach programs. It was, by any measure, a dramatic departure from the careful control he'd maintained over his company for the past quarter-century. Yet as he watched Precious teaching an evening class to aspiring healthcare workers in their clinic below, he felt nothing but certainty. The door opened quietly behind him, and Thaddeus entered, carrying 2 cups of their favorite coffee. "Still brooding?" his friend asked, setting 1 cup on the desk. "Reflecting," Amel corrected, turning from the window. "Did you finalize the Foundation's charter?" "Everything's ready." Thaddeus settled into his usual chair. "The Anders Foundation for Community Health will be able to support similar clinics across the country. Precious's model of integrated healthcare and community education will help thousands." The mention of her name brought a smile to Amel's face, something that happened with increasing frequency these days. Since the funding crisis, their relationship had deepened into something profound, a partnership that transcended both their professional and personal lives. "Have you told her yet?" Thaddeus asked quietly. "Not yet." Amel moved to sit behind his desk, his fingers tracing the worn edge where he'd spent countless hours building his empire. "I want everything to be in place first." "You know she wouldn't care about any of this." Thaddeus gestured to the papers detailing the restructuring. "She fell in love with you, not your position." The words hung in the air between them. Neither Precious nor Amel had said those 3 words yet, though they both felt them in every shared moment, every quiet conversation, every challenge faced together. "That's exactly why she deserves to have this done right," Amel replied. "No complications, no corporate politics, no questions about motivations or appearances." A knock at the door interrupted them. Imara entered, her elegant presence commanding attention, as always. "The board members are assembling for the evening meeting. Are you ready?" Amel straightened his tie and stood, gathering the papers that would change everything. "Yes," he said simply, and both his friends heard the weight of certainty in that single word. The boardroom was full when they arrived. Faces both familiar and new turned expectantly toward their CEO. Xavier Blackwood sat near the end, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity about this unexpected evening session. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amel began, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years at the helm, "thank you for coming at such short notice. Tonight, I'm announcing some significant changes to Anders Industries' leadership structure." He laid out the plan methodically, watching understanding dawn on various faces as they grasped the magnitude of what he was proposing. The creation of the foundation, the transition of power to Thaddeus, the new focus on community health initiatives. It was a dramatic departure from the pure, profit-driven approach that had dominated his early years. "But why?" Xavier interrupted, his voice sharp with disbelief. The company is more successful than ever. Why step down now? Amel's gaze swept the room, taking in the people who had been part of his journey. Because success isn't just measured in profit margins. 25 years ago, I lost sight of that. I built walls around myself and this company, focused solely on protection and control. But true strength, I've learned, comes from growing something larger than ourselves. Through the glass walls, he could see Precious in the clinic below, now consulting with Dr. Rivera about a patient's treatment plan. The sight of her, so confident and purposeful in the space they'd created together, reinforced everything he was saying. The Anders Foundation will work to establish integrated healthcare centers across the country, combining modern medicine with community education and sustainable practices. Each center will partner with local nursing schools and healthcare providers, creating opportunities for the next generation of medical professionals. The board members listened intently as he outlined the vision. A vision that had begun with a maintenance coordinator tending to orchids and grown into something transformative. Mr. Kingston has been preparing for this transition for months, Amel continued. He has my complete confidence, and I believe he will lead Anders Industries into an even more successful future. The vote that followed was largely ceremonial. Amel and Thaddeus had already secured the support they needed. Within an hour, the papers were signed, the press release was prepared, and 25 years of single-minded control had been transformed into something new and full of possibility. As the board members filed out, offering congratulations and well wishes, Amel felt a profound sense of peace. He gathered his things, said goodnight to Thaddeus and Imara, and made his way down to the clinic. Precious was finishing up with her last class, her voice carrying clearly as she explained the importance of combining traditional healing practices with modern medicine. The students hung on her every word, inspired by her passion and expertise. She looked up as he entered, and her whole face lit up with that smile that had first begun to thaw his frozen heart. "Give me 5 minutes," she asked, and he nodded, content to watch her wrap up the lesson. When the students had gone, she approached him with concern in her eyes. "Is everything all right? You've seemed preoccupied all day." Instead of answering directly, he took her hand and led her to their rooftop garden. The space had flourished under their care, becoming a testament to what could grow when nurtured with patience and love. "I made a decision today," he said as they stood among the herbs and flowers they'd planted together. "I'm stepping down as CEO. Precious's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained silent, giving him space to continue. "Thaddeus will take over the company operations while I focus on expanding what we've built here. The clinic, the educational programs, the integrated healthcare model. We're creating a foundation to support similar initiatives across the country." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "That's why you've been meeting with healthcare consultants and community organizers." He nodded, drawing her closer. 25 years ago, I thought success meant building walls to protect what was mine. You showed me that real success comes from breaking down walls, from helping others grow, from creating something meaningful together." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she reached up to touch his face. "Are you sure about this? Anders Industries has been your life's work." "It was," he agreed softly. "But you've helped me find a new purpose, a better way to use everything I've built. And I want to build this next chapter with you, not as CEO and sustainability director, but as partners in every sense." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Precious stood on tiptoe and kissed him softly, a gesture full of love and understanding. "Partners," she whispered against his lips, and in that word was every declaration of love they hadn't yet voiced. Above them, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, while below, the clinic hummed with healing energy. They stood together in the garden they'd created, ready to grow something even more beautiful together. The decision had been made, not out of fear or protective instinct like so many choices in his past, but out of love and hope for the future. After 25 years of winter, Amel Anders was finally ready to embrace the spring. Chapter 12. New Beginnings. The rooftop garden of Anders Industries bloomed with life on a perfect Seattle spring morning. White orchids, the same variety that had witnessed their first meeting, decorated every corner, their delicate petals dancing in the gentle breeze. The space they had cultivated together had been transformed into an enchanted garden for the most important day of their lives. Wooden chairs arranged in elegant rows faced an arch woven with climbing roses and healing herbs from their garden. The city sprawled below them, but up here, surrounded by the flowers and plants they'd nurtured together, it felt like they were in their own private paradise. In a quiet room, several floors below, Precious sat before a mirror while Imara made final adjustments to her hair. Her wedding dress was elegantly simple, an ivory silk sheath that highlighted her natural grace. Around her neck hung her mother's restored wedding necklace, its delicate gold chain carrying generations of love and tradition. "Your mother would be so proud," Imara said softly, securing another crystal pin in Precious's intricately braided updo. "Not just of how beautiful you look today, but of everything you've accomplished." Precious touched the necklace gently, remembering all the dreams that had led her to this moment. "Sometimes, I still can't believe how much has changed in a year," she whispered. Indeed, the changes had been remarkable. The Anders Foundation had already established 3 new integrated healthcare centers in underserved communities across the country. The original clinic had become a model for sustainable healthcare, with medical students and community members alike benefiting from its innovative approach. A knock at the door revealed Dr. Rivera, beaming with pride. "The garden is perfect," she reported, "and your groom is practically wearing a path in the floor upstairs." Precious laughed, imagining Amel pacing in his office, the same office where he'd made the decision to transform both their lives. "Is Thaddeus keeping him calm?" "Trying to," Dr. Rivera chuckled, "though I'd say calm isn't exactly the word for a man who's been waiting 25 years to feel this happy again." In his office, Amel stood before his own mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. His best man, Thaddeus, watched with amused affection. "I haven't seen you this nervous since the day you met her," his friend observed. "That's because nothing has ever been this important," Amel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She changed everything, Thaddeus. She showed me what real strength looks like, not building walls but having the courage to let them fall." The office door opened and Cordelia entered with tears already in her eyes. Over the past year, she had become one of Precious's strongest supporters, having seen how genuinely her presence had transformed both the company and its former CEO. "It's time," she announced softly. The rooftop garden filled with their chosen family, clinic staff, students, board members, and community leaders whose lives had been touched by their work together. Xavier Blackwood sat near the back, his initial resistance having gradually transformed into grudging respect for what his uncle and Precious had built together. As the string quartet began to play, all eyes turned to the rooftop entrance. Precious appeared, radiant in her simple gown, carrying a bouquet of white orchids and healing herbs from their garden. But it was her smile, bright as the morning sun, that caught everyone's breath. Amel, waiting beneath the arch, felt his heart stop at the sight of her. In that moment, every wall he'd ever built, every fear he'd ever harbored, every doubt that had plagued him over 25 years of solitude, all of it melted away in the warmth of her love. Their vows were personal and profound, spoken from hearts that had learned to trust again. Precious Amel began, his voice steady with certainty. 25 years ago, I forgot how to trust, how to dream, how to grow. Then you walked into my life, tending to orchids with such care, and showed me that the most beautiful things can bloom in the most unexpected places. You didn't try to break down my walls. You showed me how to grow something more beautiful in their place. I promise to spend the rest of my life helping your dreams grow, supporting your strength, and loving you with the same patience and care you've shown me. Tears shone in Precious's eyes as she spoke her own vows. Amel, when I first started working here, I thought I had to choose between my dreams and reality. You showed me that with love, patience, and trust, we can build something even more beautiful than we imagined alone. You didn't just give me back my dreams. You helped me create new ones, bigger ones, dreams that help others grow too. I promise to always believe in the man you truly are, to face every challenge with the honesty we've built together, and to love you with the same openness and trust you've shown me. The exchange of rings was followed by a tender kiss that made their guests burst into applause. As they turned to face their loved ones, now husband and wife, the morning sun broke through Seattle's clouds, bathing the rooftop garden in golden light. The celebration that followed was joyful and intimate. Tables set among the herbs and flowers held plates of elegant food. Students from their healthcare program served mocktails infused with herbs from the garden. Dr. Rivera raised a toast to the couple who had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of so many others through their vision of integrated community care. Their first dance took place as the sun began to set, casting the garden in the same golden hues that had illuminated their first meeting. As they moved together to the music, Precious in her elegant gown and Amel in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, they were surrounded by the fruits of their love. The thriving garden, the successful foundation, the lives they had touched together. 25 years was worth the wait, Amel whispered as he held her close. And this is just the beginning, Precious replied softly, her eyes shining with love and promise. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, while all around them, the garden they'd cultivated together released its sweet fragrance into the evening air. Their love story, which had begun with a chance encounter among orchids, had bloomed into something far more beautiful than either could have imagined. In the years that followed, the Anders Foundation would establish dozens more integrated healthcare centers across the country. Precious would complete her nursing degree while continuing to innovate in community healthcare education. Their rooftop garden would inspire similar projects in cities around the world. But on this perfect spring evening, none of that mattered. What mattered was the love that had grown between them, as steady and natural as the herbs in their garden, as healing as the work they did together, as real as the trust they had built day by day. They had proven that true love doesn't see titles or status, it sees the heart. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected places, blooming like flowers in the cracks of carefully constructed walls, growing into something strong enough to heal not just two hearts, but an entire community. As night fell over Seattle, the rooftop garden glowed with strings of soft lights, like stars brought down to earth. Amel and Precious Anders stood among the flowers they had planted together, their love story a testament to the power of second chances, the strength of honesty, and the beauty that can grow when two hearts learn to trust again. Subscribe if you enjoyed.